I bit my lip to keep from screaming. Behind that laughter, I heard something faint, a soft whimper, like the sound of a dying bird. Emily. The air carried the smell of pine and chimney smoke. My heart beat fast as I approached her street, where the glow from her windows spilled across untouched snow. I imagined her inside, maybe wrapping gifts, humming along to the Christmas songs she loved as a child. The houses shimmered with strings of yellow lights, laughter muffled behind their closed doors. My fingers gripped the suitcase handle tighter. I hadn't seen Emily for months, and tonight was meant to be a surprise, a mother's gift of presents. As I neared the porch, laughter drifted through the wooden door, warm and venomous. Mr. Whitlock's gruff voice cut through the music. 4 miscarriages, and she still calls herself a wife. His words hit like stones thrown into a still pond. Under the dim porch light, I froze. There, slumped in an old wooden chair, was Emily. Her thin blouse clung to her skin, damp from melting snow, her arms wrapped around herself as she trembled uncontrollably. Her lips were pale, her cheeks ghostly white. I rushed forward, dropping my suitcase into the snow. Then Ryan's mocking tone followed, slick with pride. Always faking depression, locking herself away for sympathy. Another round of laughter erupted, Abigail's sharp, like glass breaking. My heart pounded as I pressed closer to the window. Every cruel word was a dagger twisting deeper, every sneer another wound on my daughter's soul. My hands shook as I tried to warm her, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Tears blurred my vision, but I held her tighter. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice breaking between fear and fury. "I've got you now." "Emily!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She turned slowly, her eyes red and glassy. "Mum," she whispered, the word barely a breath. I yanked off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling her close, feeling how terrifyingly cold she was. From inside the house came laughter, carefree, loud, and cruel. Through the frosted window, I saw the Whitlocks gathered around a grand table glowing with candlelight. Silverware clinked, glasses sparkled, and the fire in their hearth danced while my daughter froze just outside their warmth. She discovers her trembling daughter, delivers the 6-word moment, and directly addresses the audience to like, subscribe, and share where they're listening from. I pounded the door with my fist, the music inside refusing to hear us. The lock clicked, and Evelyn Whitlock appeared, lips lacquered red, a wineglass tilting in her hand. "Ms. Hale, what a surprise," she purred, eyes sliding over Emily and my arms, like she was clutter to be stored outside. The taxi stopped at the edge of a quiet Boise neighborhood blanketed in snow. I stepped out, my heavy boots sinking deep as the night wind bit at my face. The sky hung low and grey, and each exhale turned to mist before fading into the cold. I had trained fighters to endure storms, yet that walk through the winter felt harder than any match, a battle between hope and fear. Beneath every crunching step, one thought pulsed in my chest. I'm finally home. At the Boise airport, the sliding doors breathed out a draft of jet fuel and winter, and I told myself the cold would make the reunion sweeter. I'd planned the surprise for weeks, timing my flight between training camps, imagining Emily's laugh when she opened the door and fell into my arms. While I waited for the shuttle, I called her once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like a step backward into worry. I texted, "Landing soon." "Are you home?" The screen stayed silent, a little blue bubble that never turned into words. Traffic thickened near the cathedral, cones and flares cutting stripes through the snow. A young traffic cop waved us through, his face familiar even before memory caught up. Jake. Years since he was the lanky kid who bowed to me at the community center's sparring mat, earnest and gentle even when he missed a block. I lowered the window and called his name. His eyes widened in recognition, joy breaking first, then closing like a door against weather. "Coach," he said, tipping his cap. "Back for Christmas?" I nodded. "With Emily." At her name, something flickered, hesitation, a swallowed warning. Then the light changed, and the cab moved on. Something inside me snapped. I kicked the door wide, the sound cracking through carols as red wine splashed across their perfect rug. "You threw my daughter into the cold," I said, voice shaking. "And you will answer for it." The shuttle dropped me near the taxi line, lights reflecting off blacktop glossed with sleet. Families, couples, and church choirs in wool coats swirled around me, carrying poinsettias and pies. I gripped my old suitcase and climbed into a yellow cab, giving the driver Meadow Creek and a street number I could have recited in my sleep. As we rolled past downtown, bells tolled for evening mass, and the driver hummed "Silent Night" under his breath. I pictured Emily setting the table, tying ribbons, humming along because she always did when she cooked. Mr. and Mrs. Whitlock raised their champagne with smiles, their voices spilling joy into the night. For them, it was Christmas. For Emily, it was exile. My breath caught as I watched the celebration unfold, a feast of comfort and cruelty. The sound of their laughter mixed with the howling wind, each note cutting deeper than the cold itself. Harold rose at the head of the table, smoothing his tie, authority like armor. Abigail laughed, a bright little knife. I laid Emily on the nearest couch and faced them all. This ends now. On Christmas Eve, I returned home unannounced, the cold biting through my coat as I approached the glowing house. Through the frosted window, laughter echoed. But outside, on the porch, my daughter sat trembling in the snow, her lips blue. I rushed forward, heart pounding. Ryan's shadow fell across her like a storm. "Enough!" he barked, his tone slicing through the room. "You've embarrassed me enough already." Emily flinched, her shoulders collapsing inward. He took a step closer, eyes sharp, jaw tight. The air in the room thickened with tension, and even the ornaments on the Christmas tree seemed to tremble. Ryan's smirk twisted as he took a step closer, but I didn't back away. My voice steadied, low and cutting. "This ends now." I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and held it where they could see. "You think this is a family argument? It's not. This is abuse." The word hung heavy in the air like a hammer drop. I straightened and faced them all. "Here's what happens next. I take her. I file the report. And if any of you step near her again, you meet me in front of a judge who actually listens." The ornaments on the tree trembled with the furnace's sigh. For the first time, their laughter was gone. Only the clock ticked, counting down to consequences. I tried to shrug off the chill that wasn't from the air. Maybe she set her phone down. Maybe the music was loud. Yet unease threaded the car like a draft you can't find. We turned onto her street, where every house glowed with butter-yellow warmth, and the snow lay unmarked except by deer prints and hope. I paid the fare, stepped out, and pulled my collar high. Surprise was supposed to be a ribbon. Instead, it tightened like a knot I couldn't undo. Emily stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open like a fragile bird waking from frost. Her lips quivered as she tried to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped. "I'm so tired," she murmured, voice trembling. "No one understands." Her hands twisted the edge of the blanket, and she tried to sit up, but her body refused to obey. The fire crackled behind us, its warmth mocking the cold that still clung to her bones. "Useless?" My voice cracked and rose. I pointed to the frost clinging to Emily's hairline. 4 losses, and your answer was the porch. I turned to Harold. You, a man who knows the law, called it tradition. He bristled, but didn't blink. A family endures, he intoned. She failed to endure. I stepped in front of her, every muscle in my body coiled tight. You'll not speak to her like that, I said, my voice low but burning. My hands shook, not with fear, but with fury. I'd heard her cries on the phone for months, heard the silence that followed every miscarriage. The emptiness in her eyes now was the same as the nights she'd called me, sobbing from her locked bedroom. You've taken enough from her, I said, meeting Ryan's glare without blinking. Jake lingered by the door, hat in hand. You did the right thing, he said softly. I nodded, though my chest ached with everything still undone. Thank you, I replied, for answering. He gave a small, tired smile before stepping into the cold. The door closed, leaving only the hum of the heater and the slow rhythm of Emily's breathing. Evelyn's smile was porcelain and poison. Don't be theatrical, Ms. Hale. She needed fresh air. Abigail's laugh chimed again, small and bright and cruel. Ryan swaggered closer, bottle tilted, chin up. You storm in here like a hero, he sneered. But she's been useless for months. The night after we found refuge, I woke to the faint rustle of paper sliding under the door. My heart clenched as I picked it up, a plain white envelope, cold from the winter air. Inside, one sentence scrawled in jagged ink. Stop meddling, or you'll regret it. No signature, no return address, just those words, trembling with arrogance. For a long moment, I stood frozen, the note shaking in my hand as the heater hummed softly behind me. Heat rolled from the fireplace, but the room felt colder than the porch. Spilled wine veined across the white rug like fresh cuts. Harold adjusted his tie and claimed the air with a judge's stare. You've made your point, he said, voice heavy with entitlement. Now leave. I stood between him and Emily, who lay breathing shallowly on the couch, my coat around her shoulders. I'm not leaving, I said. You are going to hear what you did. I pulled out the shoebox where I'd kept every bank slip, message and photo over the years. Evidence of every sacrifice I'd made for Emily's happiness. Late-night transfers for groceries, medical bills, all marked with small hearts in the memo lines. My hands trembled as I spread the papers across the table. They'll pay for this, I whispered. Not in vengeance, but in truth. By dawn, the kitchen was covered in papers and memories. Decades of love turned into proof. I called Jake, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. They sent a threat, I said, and I'm done being scared. He hesitated, then replied, I'll file it as evidence. But be careful, Miss Rose. The Whitlocks don't fight fair. I looked at the note again, the ink still glistening faintly under the light. Neither do I said quietly, my reflection hard in the window's frost. I didn't wake Emily. She'd finally fallen asleep after days of terror, her breathing soft and uneven. I slipped the note into my pocket and sat at the kitchen table, the old clock ticking like a heartbeat. My anger burned quiet, but deep. They thought they could frighten me into silence, the same way they'd crushed her spirit. But fear was a weapon I'd learned to master. We reached my apartment just past midnight. I'd left the porch light on, a small, defiant promise I'd made to myself years ago. Always leave a light for those who need to find their way back. Jake helped me guide Emily inside. She sank onto the couch, curling into the blanket I'd kept from her childhood. For a moment, I saw the little girl she once was, barefoot, laughing, unbroken. Jake began visiting more often. He never came empty-handed. A basket of fruit, an old cookbook, a bouquet of poinsettias. His presence brought a soft steadiness into the apartment, the kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. He talked to Emily gently, never pushing her to speak, but reminding her through his actions that she was still seen, still valued. One evening, he told her, "Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about forgiving yourself for surviving." Emily didn't answer, but her lips trembled in a way that told me she heard every word. Evelyn laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "Abuse?" she mocked. "We're just teaching her her place, Rose." Emily's fingers tightened weakly around my wrist. "Mum, please," she whispered, her voice faint as smoke. I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, not anymore." The days that followed felt quieter, but not peaceful. Emily spoke little, her words coming in whispers like fragile glass. Every morning, I made her breakfast: pancakes, eggs, tea, anything that might bring back a trace of warmth to her cheeks. She would sit by the window, the winter sun painting faint gold across her face, staring at nothing, yet holding everything in her eyes. Sometimes, when I passed by, I'd see her tracing circles on the fogged glass, lost in memories she couldn't say aloud. I began dialing. The screen's glow cast a cold light across my hand. Ryan's face paled for the first time that night. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but his tone cracked on the last word. "Oh, I dare," I replied, pressing the call button. The line rang once before a calm dispatcher answered. I spoke clearly, each word fueled by years of swallowed anger. "This is Margaret Hale. I'm reporting a case of domestic abuse at 112 Meadow Creek, Boise." Snowflakes clung to Emily's hair as we stepped out into the night, the porch light flickering behind us like a dying witness. Jake guided us toward his cruiser, his breath fogging in the cold air. "You'll ride with me?" he said gently. Emily leaned against my shoulder, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her grip on my arm was steady. She was still fighting, even if her strength came in shivers. Emily kept her eyes down, clutching her small folder of papers. She looked fragile next to their polished confidence, a sparrow among hawks. "Don't look at them," I whispered. "Just remember why we're here." She nodded faintly, her throat tight. Jake appeared near the door, uniform pressed, gaze steady. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, a promise that we weren't alone. The morning of the trial came cold and grey, the kind of sky that pressed low, heavy with silence. Emily stood beside me outside the Boise courthouse, her fingers trembling in mine. She wore a simple navy coat, the same one she'd worn to her last anniversary. It no longer fit right, but she refused to buy a new one. "It's just for one day," she murmured, almost to herself. I looked at her pale face, framed by stray strands of hair the wind kept lifting, and felt my heart tighten with both pride and sorrow. "Fresh air," she added, shrugging toward the porch. Rage rang in my ears. "Fresh air at 32 degrees? I shouldered past the threshold, but Ryan swaggered into view, shirt unbuttoned, bottle dangling. "Close it, Mom," he said, not looking at Emily. "She can stay out till she stops acting fragile." Inside, the courthouse was a cathedral of marble and echoes. Every footstep sounded like judgment. The Whitlocks had arrived early, Ryan in his tailored grey suit, adjusting his tie like a man rehearsing victory. Evelyn and Abigail, poised in expensive coats, eyes sharp and assessing. At their side stood Mr. Harold Whitlock, leaning on his cane but carrying himself like he still owned the room. The air bent around him, decades of authority wrapped in arrogance. He sneered. "She's broken, and it's not my fault." His words hit me like ice. I wanted to scream, to shake him until his arrogance cracked. But Emily's voice, weak and trembling, stopped me. "Mum, please," she whispered. Her small hand reached for mine, fingers barely warm. I just want it to stop. Tears blurred my sight, but I knelt beside her and took her hand. "It will stop," I promised. "I swear it." My throat burned with the weight of every unspoken word, every year I'd missed, every time I thought she was safe. I looked at her, at the bruises that weren't on her skin but in her soul, and something inside me hardened into resolve. I turned back to Ryan, my voice like tempered steel. "You will never hurt her again. Not with your hands, not with your words, not with your power." The fire behind us roared louder, as if answering my fury. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope beneath them, a spark waiting to survive. Late at night, after Emily had fallen asleep, I'd sit at the table again, surrounded by papers and exhaustion. The lawyer I'd contacted, Mr. James, was confident but cautious. "They'll fight dirty," he warned over the phone. "You'll need every document, every message, every witness." I gathered everything, labeling folders until my hands cramped. Jake offered to testify as a witness, his tone steady as always. I saw what they did. "I won't stay silent." The gavel struck. "Objection sustained. The recording will be excluded." The words fell like a death sentence. My breath caught. I wanted to stand and scream. Instead, I clutched Emily's hand tighter, feeling her trembling pulse. Tears welled, but I swallowed them. Mr. James tried to recover, turning back to the remaining evidence. But the momentum was gone. The Whitlock's lawyer smirked, spinning lies with polished precision, painting Emily as lazy, unstable, ungrateful. Their witness, the old housekeeper, trembled as she testified, her words rehearsed. She refused to help. She stayed in her room all day. Mr. James pressed on, playing the recording Jake had captured that night. The laughter, the cruel voices, the cold words thrown at my daughter's pain. For a heartbeat, the room fell into breathless silence. Then, the other side erupted. Their lawyer leapt to his feet, voice booming. "Objection! That recording violates privacy laws. It's inadmissible." The judge frowned, tapping his pen against the desk. I watched hope flicker and fade from Emily's eyes. The courtroom felt like a frozen stage where truth itself was on trial. My lawyer, Mr. James, stood straight, voice firm, but edged with the gravity of the moment. "Your Honor, we present documented evidence. Bank transfers from Mrs. Rose supporting her daughter, medical records, and witness testimony establishing sustained emotional abuse." His words rippled through the silence like stones breaking still water. Each paper he held felt like a piece of my soul. Years of care, proof of love turned into exhibits. Inside the car, the heater hummed low. The world beyond the windshield blurred into white streaks as we drove through Boise's sleeping streets. For the first time that night, silence didn't feel like judgment. It felt like safety. Emily stared at her reflection in the window, eyes hollow but alive. "He's going to come after me," she whispered. Emily sat beside me, shoulders trembling. She wouldn't look up. Her eyes fixed on the floor, on the reflection of the overhead lights that seemed to mock us. Ryan sat across the aisle, arms folded, a faint smirk twisting his mouth. Evelyn's painted lips curled in satisfaction, while Harold leaned back, like a man already reading tomorrow's victory headline. Abigail whispered to her mother, smirking. They thought this was theatre, and they were winning. Each night, when I checked on Emily, she was sleeping lighter, her breathing slower, her body less tense. The nightmares still came, but she no longer woke up screaming. I took her hand one evening as she stirred and whispered, "We're getting ready, sweetheart. This time, we fight on our terms." She nodded faintly, eyes closed, a tear slipping down her cheek. Not from fear, but from the fragile hope beginning to bloom again. Across the aisle, Ryan adjusted his tie with the smugness of a man who already knew the outcome. Evelyn and Abigail exchanged knowing glances, their painted smiles thin as knives. Harold stood behind them, calm and assured, the posture of someone who'd long mastered the art of control. The judge entered, robe swaying like a curtain drawn on the final act. "Court is now in session," he said, his tone cold and rehearsed. I braced myself. Something inside me snapped. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound cutting through the murmurs. "You think this is justice?" My voice cracked, raw and shaking. "You destroy her, humiliate her, and still call yourselves human?" The courtroom turned, every gaze locking on me. Ryan smirked wider, leaning back. "Careful, Margaret. You're starting to sound unstable, like your daughter." The final day of the trial dawned grey and heavy, the courthouse cloaked in that tense hush that comes before a storm. I sat beside Emily, her hand icy in mine, both of us staring at the judge's bench as if the wood itself could whisper our fate. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the scrape of a chair, felt amplified. Mr. James leaned forward, whispering, "Stay strong, whatever happens." His voice carried both warning and pity. I froze. Every syllable landed like a blow. My ears rang, the room tilted. I looked at Emily, her face drained of colour, her mouth opening but no sound coming. Across the aisle, Ryan smirked, his victory sealed. Evelyn clasped her hands together as though in prayer, her satisfaction unhidden. Abigail leaned forward, whispering something that made both women laugh quietly. Even Harold, the old judge, allowed himself a small, triumphant nod. The courtroom applauded in silence, a grotesque theatre of power and privilege. Gasps rippled around the room. Evelyn's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the rug, red wine bleeding into the fabric like guilt itself. Harold stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. "You have no idea who you're challenging," he warned. "I've spent my life on the bench. One call won't shake this family." I met his gaze, steady and cold. "Then let the law see what kind of judge you really are." The judge called for order, gavel striking again, but the room had already fractured beyond repair. The Whitlocks gathered their papers and strutted out like royalty dismissed from their throne. The silence they left behind was heavier than any sound. Jake helped us stand. His eyes met mine, calm, steady, a silent vow that this wasn't over. As we walked out, I didn't look back. The system had failed, but I hadn't. Not yet. The gavel's echo hadn't faded when Ryan rose from his seat, victory written in every line of his face. "Guess money really does talk," he muttered, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. His lawyer gave a shallow laugh. Evelyn smirked, whispering to Abigail, "Justice served." Their words hit like shards of glass. I could feel Emily trembling beside me, her tears silent but unending. We took our seats. My lawyer, Mr. James, leaned over and said softly, "They've brought influence, not evidence. Stay calm and let me speak." His tone was professional, but I saw the tension in his jaw. Across the aisle, Ryan smirked, leaning back in his chair as if the outcome had already been written. I reached for Emily's hand again, feeling her pulse racing beneath her skin. The judge entered, his robe brushing the floor, face unreadable. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed like thunder. For a brief moment, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Jake stopped by that evening, setting his hat on the table, eyes full of restrained relief. "It's spreading fast," he said quietly. "The department's investigating. They can't bury it this time." I nodded, unable to speak. For the first time since that night, I felt something like justice stirring, not from courts or gavels, but from truth refusing to die in silence. I took a step toward Ryan, tears stinging my eyes. "You may have won this case, but you'll never escape what you've done. The world will see you for what you are." Ryan rose to his feet, meeting my glare with cold amusement. "The world doesn't care, sweetheart. It cares who signs the checks." His voice dripped arrogance. Jake's hand moved to Ryan's shoulder, his restraint iron tight. "One more word, and I'll escort you out myself." Ryan sneered, but didn't reply. Emily sobbed harder, her body shaking. I turned back to her, taking her face in my hands. "Look at me," I whispered. "He doesn't win if we still have each other." She nodded weakly, her voice barely a breath. "I just want to go home." Reporters camped outside the Whitlock's estate, microphones flashing, questions flying about corruption, favoritism, and the judge's bias. Evelyn's polished mask cracked on camera. Ryan tried to smile, but couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. Their power was crumbling, not by law, but by the people's voice. I wanted to stand, to scream that justice had been bought and bartered, but my body wouldn't move. The judge didn't meet my eyes. The gavel hit once. Case closed. The sound echoed like a coffin lid slamming shut. Around me, papers rustled, lawyers murmured. Mr. James sighed, defeated. He leaned toward me, whispering, "I'm sorry. The system's not blind. It just looks away for the rich." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing words through the ache. "Then we'll make it see again." Emily broke then, her sobs quiet but raw. I pulled her close, cradling her head against my shoulder as she whispered, "Mom, they took everything." I tightened my grip, staring past the Whitlock's cold triumph, my voice low but fierce. "Not everything. They didn't take your soul." Jake moved from the back of the room before I could react, his voice sharp. "That's enough." His uniform caught the courtroom lights, the authority in his tone slicing through the tension. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Mr. James whispered hoarsely, "Mrs. Rose, please, don't give them what they want." But I couldn't stop. The rage had burned too long to stay quiet. As for me, I found joy in simple things again. Folding laundry, tending to the old plant on the windowsill, watching the sunset glow on Emily's face. Healing, I realized, didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, in the scent of cooking soup, the sound of shared laughter, and the quiet peace of knowing we'd survived the storm. One afternoon, I caught them talking quietly by the window. Emily was showing him a new recipe, her voice light, almost playful. Jake listened intently, a soft grin on his face. It wasn't romance that filled the air, not yet, but something gentler, the beginning of trust, of warmth growing where pain had once lived. Jake became a frequent visitor, always knocking softly before stepping in. He brought laughter back into our home, the easy kind that didn't hurt to hear. Sometimes he'd fix small things, like the flickering kitchen bulb or the loose window latch, never saying much, just offering his presence like a promise. Emily would smile shyly, her cheeks pink whenever their eyes met. The decision came faster than I expected. The words rolled from his mouth in that detached, official tone. "The court grants the divorce request of the plaintiff, Emily Rose, and the defendant, Ryan Whitlock." For a fleeting second, hope flared in me like sunlight through storm clouds. Emily's lips parted, trembling with relief. But before she could exhale, the next words crushed that fragile light. However, the court finds insufficient legal evidence to support claims of domestic abuse. As for property division, the court awards the majority of shared assets to the defendant. If this story touched you, don't let it fade. Share it, comment your thoughts, and let your voice be heard. Would you stay quiet for peace or stand up for love? Emily sat beside me on the couch, the glow of the screen flickering on her pale face. "Mum," she whispered, voice breaking, "why are they all defending me?" I brushed a strand of hair from her eyes and said softly, "Because the truth finally has witnesses." The apartment was silent except for the hum of the heater, but the noise outside, the collective anger, the empathy of thousands, felt like thunder echoing through our walls. We stood by the window afterward, watching the snow melt under the orange glow of streetlights. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Words felt unnecessary. What remained between us was stronger than grief, something quieter, but unbreakable. The snow had returned by the time winter began to fade, soft flakes drifting past the window as if the world itself were rewriting our story. Emily sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sketching idly in her journal. Her laughter, light, genuine, filled the air like music I hadn't heard in years. I watched her from the kitchen, feeling the weight in my chest finally lift. Every scar she bore had turned into something luminous, proof of endurance. Ryan lunged forward as if to grab my phone, but a knock echoed from the front door. A sharp, deliberate sound. The entire room froze. Through the frosted glass, the silhouette of a man stood beneath the porch light. My breath hitched. I recognized that stance. Jake, my former student. The one who'd once learned discipline under my guidance now wore the badge to defend it. The door opened, and the winter wind swept through, carrying justice on its back. Jake's voice was firm, professional. "Boise Police Department. We received a report of possible abuse." Evelyn stammered. Ryan's arrogance dissolved, and Harold's jaw tightened like stone. I exhaled slowly, my pulse finally steady. "You can explain everything to him," I said. "But this time, the world will listen." Every lie felt like a slap. The judge listened, impassive, his pen scratching paper without pause. Ryan leaned forward, chin resting on his hand, eyes full of contempt. When our lawyer stood to object, the judge barely looked up. "Overruled." Over and over, the same word cut through the air like a whip. I realized then, it wasn't a trial. It was a show, and the verdict had already been sold. When Mr. James sat down, defeated, I turned to Emily. Her face was pale, lips trembling. "Mum," she whispered, voice cracking, "why does truth always lose?" I couldn't answer. I just brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and whispered, "Not forever, sweetheart. Not forever." When the headlines hit, it felt like a storm breaking loose. "Whitlock trial. Justice bought," screamed across Boise's morning papers. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages and calls, each one carrying a piece of outrage from strangers who had seen the video. Emily's trembling voice, her tear-streaked face, Jake holding her back as chaos unfolded in court. The clip spread like wildfire, shared, reposted, debated. Some called her a victim of power, others a symbol of quiet courage. I scrolled through the comments with shaking hands, the words blurring from tears I didn't even realize were falling. Outside, the world went on. Cars passing, neighbors laughing, life resuming its rhythm. But inside our small apartment, we'd built something the world couldn't touch. Forgiveness, resilience, and love that refused to die. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel haunted by what we'd lost. I felt blessed for what we'd found. One evening, as the sky turned amber, she handed me a drawing, a house surrounded by flowers, two figures standing in the garden. "It's us," she said simply. I smiled, tracing the lines with trembling fingers. "You drew hope," I whispered. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "No, Mom, you did. Every answer matters, because every story like Emily's lights another candle in the dark." Subscribe for more stories that remind us that courage, compassion, and forgiveness can still change lives. The story you've just heard is fictional, but its heart beats with truth. Somewhere, a mother still fights in silence, and a daughter still searches for her worth. The days after the media storm felt strangely calm. The world outside buzzed with noise, but inside our little apartment, peace was finally beginning to take root. Each morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, warming the wooden floor where Emily sat with a cup of tea, her hands steady for the first time in months. She'd begun cooking again. Simple meals at first, pancakes and soup, but every motion felt like a quiet reclaiming of herself. I watched her hum softly while stirring the pot, and my heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope.